Universe, greetings. My name is Bobby Parker with Beyond Clean, and I'm so excited to have you here for our panel discussion today. What is workflow optimization in SPD? So welcome back if you are returning to us for another Beyond Clean event, and especially warm welcome if this is your first event with us. Talking about workflow optimization today, we've heard all the buzzwords about workflows, productivity, optimization in sterile processing, but I want to dive into what does that really mean on a day-to-day basis in our department? What is workflow optimization, and specifically, how do we set up our sterile processing departments for success? I'm sure if you've registered and jumped in here, it is because you want to know the answers to the same. How can we be more efficient and optimized in our workflow? So we've got some great industry experts here that are going to be joining forces today to look at those concepts and some components of optimization, while we take a special look at some of the common challenges that sterile processings encounter, and when implementing optimization techniques, how to overcome some of those challenges. We're also going to try to include some actionable steps that you can take to set up your SPD workflow for long-term success. So I guess keep a pen and paper at hand while you're listening. Before we jump into it, I want to say thank you again to Getinge as our sponsor for making this amazing hour of education possible. If you are in it for the CE credits today, good news, we have this approved for 1 CE credit through HSPA, and the CBSPD credit is currently pending. So at the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be automatically directed to the CE event quiz after the conclusion of the seminar, where you can get that CE certificate. If you need the CBSPD certificate after you go through that quiz, if you will email us at info@beyondclean.net, we can make sure to get that emailed to you once we have that certificate with CBSPD taken care of. Also, I want to direct your attention to orient you to a couple of things that you'll see on your screen in addition to us speakers and the slides for today's webinar. There is a question and answer, ask a question box. If you type anything in there and send it over to us, I will receive that question. And so as I moderate today's event, I'll try to keep one eyeball in that box while we are going through our presentation today. So if there's something that you want to know, we will try to stop midstream and answer those questions. And if not, try to get to them at the end. And then if we run out of time, those questions will be directed to our panelists through email so that we can get you connected with them afterwards. Another bit of housekeeping. If you have any issues with audio or video, oftentimes the best thing that you can do is refresh the browser and hop back into the session. And more often than not, that will take care of it. I've already seen a couple of emojis popping up on the screen. You'll find some reaction icons that you can share your reaction to the information that's being presented during today's webinar. So select your favorite emoji and light it up. The more we see those flying up, I'm sure the more energy we're going to charge up these panelists with. So feel free to use that. You'll also find a resource window where you can find some information from today's sponsor, and also you can find Beyond Clean in that the LinkedIn link in that resource window. And so there you can stay up to date on our latest content and educational events. And then there should be a speaker bio tool to tell you about the speakers for today's event as well. So deep breath, got through all of that housekeeping stuff. Let me introduce our panelists to you today. First, I want to introduce Andy Mikos. Andy is a territory manager of infection control at Getinge. He's a dedicated SPD advocate who actively participates in educational opportunities, hands-on consulting, and speaking engagements, and just is an all-around nice guy. So we're happy to have Andy here talking about workflow optimization with us. Albert Csapo is the Regional Director of Clinical Utilization at Vancouver Coastal Health, which sounds like a beautiful place to work. Albert is passionate about refining and improving the effectiveness and efficiency of perioperative services departments throughout his healthcare organization. So he's the director of our user side of this discussion. You all probably know Stephen Adams, Central Sterile Manager at Sinai Hospital. Steve is the president of the Maryland Association of Sterile Processing Professionals and a member of the AMI Working Group 40 and several sterilization reprocessing focus groups associated with 3M, Pure Processing, Ofsted, Insights. Steve's having some technical difficulties today, so we're going to try to get him on the panel here, but hopefully he's going to pop in the middle of our discussion. And then Robert Shupe is the Senior System Director for Sterile Processing and Lean Six Sigma Professional Development at NYU Langone Health. And he has an extensive background in consulting for process improvement in health hospital operations, research, academics, and corporate services. And so looking forward to seeing how that Lean Six Sigma emphasis is going to come into play with the workflow optimization. So with that, please join me in welcoming in our panelists. Come on in, guys. Awesome. Well, good to see you guys. I am excited to just dive right into this thing. So before we jump into it, I've obviously read the bios, but feel free to say a quick hello and maybe how many years you've been associated with the sterile processing industry as we get started.
Bobby, I'll go ahead and start. So Andy Mikos, I have been in the sterile processing arena for 21 years.
Love it.
Robert Shupe. I've been in sterile processing for 25 years, and I had a short sabbatical for 10 years where I ran our process improvement area of the system.
Awesome.
Hi there, it's Albert Csapo. I've been with the healthcare facility for just over 30 years, and about half that period of time with what we call medical device reprocessing in Canada.
Awesome. And I'm Bobby Parker. I've been in the sterile processing industry about 12 years or so. So doing the quick math, we've got nearly a century represented here of experience to talk about this important topic. I do hope that we're able to hear from Steve throughout the presentation. If there are any sure things in life, it is death, taxes, and technical difficulties. So hang with us on that one. And I do apologize for having some technical difficulties on today's event. So guys, as we are getting started, let's get going on some workflow optimization definitions. Tell me a little bit about what is it that we're talking about. That's the title of our presentation. What is workflow optimization? So what are some of the aspects that are included in that? Feel free to take one of them and give us kind of the quick version. So Andy, why don't you lead us off here?
Yeah, so I'll start with the physical layout, right? So when you're looking at the physical layout of an SPD, you're shooting for a unidirectional process, right? You're going from dirty to clean, and you want to make sure that you're moving forward. You're not moving back. You're not going back to dirty. So you're really focused on that. You don't want any bottlenecking, and you're really hoping for efficiency, and you don't want to reduce any of your quality.
That's perfect. And we're also, in addition to that physical layout and that unidirectional flow, that's really important to present cross-contamination and really important from a Lean Six Sigma standpoint of not wasting a lot of steps in human motion. There's others that go into it as well, because you can have a great layout but still have bottlenecks. So talk to me a little bit about the equipment piece of this as well. What does equipment have to do with it? One of you other guys jump in there.
Sure, I can go. It's Albert.
Yeah, go ahead, Albert.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so your staff need the right tools to get the job done effectively and as efficiently as possible. So having the proper equipment is essential to workflow optimization. You have to ensure that your equipment has the required capacity to meet the demands of your clients, and some of the biggest clients, of course, are the OR. And in the case of an OR, that depends on the type of medical devices that you're supposed to be processing for them. So capacity can be calculated correctly by closely looking at the workflows of these other departments. So when the OR is typically, you look at their slate and you see when the peaks and the valleys are, and your equipment has to be able to meet those peak level demands. And like I believe Andy mentioned, you don't want to create bottlenecks due to lack of proper equipment. So it's essential throughout the reprocessing.
Perfect. And then why don't Robert, you define what processes have to do with workflow optimization?
Sure. So when I think about processes, I always want to think about, ensuring that the processes, steps that we have in place are providing value to our customers, right? So ultimately that everything that we're doing, is making sense for what we provide to Periop. And, that the activities are clear. The connections between those activities are unambiguous, and that we develop workflows that move the item, the process forward, with as little waste as possible. So some of the ways we can do that, standard operating procedures, visual workplace, making sure those connections are clear, that we have feedback loops, and when something is sent, that we're also providing that information. And then lastly, and I think this links back to both physical layout and equipment, is making sure we have clear visibility and a physical layout that has adjacencies that make sense.
Yeah, that's so important. And all three of these are kind of the three legs to a three-legged stool. Any one of these that's broken, you're going to end up with a poor outcome. Processes in particular, I think of kind of the roads that your team travels on. We mentioned equipment are the tools in their hands. If you don't have well-paved roads, you might still get to your destination, but it's going to take you a lot longer, and you're going to have a lot more chips in your paint on the way. And so defining processes that are repeatable, that are documented, that everybody can fall in line with are so important to this conversation. And I'm sure we'll jump in more to each of these as we go through, but that's a great definition to get us started. As we round the corner to talk about some common challenges in workflow optimizations, tell me a little bit about what you think are the obstacles that people that cause people to need workflow optimization in their departments. What are the things that tend to bog us down or get us off track? And Robert, I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, I, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, there's a lot of things that we put in place with good intention, meaning that something goes wrong and then we add in a step to avoid having that problem. And when that happens too often, what ends up being a result of that is a whole bunch of steps that may not make sense in providing what we're trying to get to our customers. I see this a lot. We'll have one thing go wrong, we add a step. The step doesn't necessarily always solve that issue, so we add another step. Now we're doing multiple things that don't necessarily make sense. And I would challenge everyone. I challenge my teams to do this too. Not to get too bogged down in what may be dogma or policy, but making sure that we're looking at the work we're doing and asking, is this redundant? Does this make sense to deliver the service or the good that we're trying to provide?
I think that's really wise. And in my experience, sometimes the best people to do that very thing that you're talking about are your brand new technicians, right? Because the fish doesn't know he's wet. We get used to the processes that just, we do it because that's the way we do things here. But as you're training new people, give them the permission to push back and say, like, why in the world are we doing that? We just documented that 3 times over there, and now we're documenting it a 4th time. Those types of things we get stuck in that don't make sense to our trainees. We got to listen to those. You're
getting me kind of excited about this. I just was walking down the hallway and I saw one of our new trainees walking with our educator. And every time I see this, I stop and I say, hey, where'd you come from? What were you doing before you were here? Especially outside industry. We get a lot of people from food service or, management, roles that come in here. The outside eyes are great. And asking your frontline staff to provide, the feedback is good, but getting those folks right away and saying, hey, I want to hear what are the problems, what do we run into, where can we do better? That's how we can continue to really get to where we want to go, is saying, hey, escalate those problems. If we're not talking about problems, what are we here for? What are we solving? So you're spot on, that we've got to get those outside eyes and harness that wisdom that comes with the folks that are new to the industry.
Yeah, so we'll call that that challenge maybe the reactive nature of sterile processing, of always trying to put a patch or fix on some process that went wrong one time 5 years ago, and now we're stuck doing this workaround that we don't even need anymore. But there's a lot of others that we come in contact with as well. Albert, any that you want to pick out?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, sorry, as it relates to complex issues, or just
any common challenge that you think creates the need for workflow optimization in sterile processing.
Yeah, and I would say one of the largest challenges that we've had in our health authority early on was really just putting the department on the map as a priority. It's an enabler in order for the operating room to function efficiently. And having said that, getting adequate funding to keep up with technology, which is essential to optimizing workflow, has been a challenge. It's getting a lot better. We're getting a lot more buy-in from our senior leadership as far as pushing our department forward and not being the bottleneck for patient flow. So I would say just the adequate funding to do what we need to do, and that also includes having the proper inventory of instrumentation. So that we're not constantly trying to turn over a set, 2 or 3 times a day just to keep the ORs running.
Yeah, and the reality for a lot of our listeners is that you live with what you have to live with in those layout challenges and equipment challenges that you mentioned. And very rarely do you come across a sterile processing leader who says that they've got all the space in the world that they need for storing things, and that their flow makes a lot of sense. They've got the equipment set up that works best for them. And so it takes creativity sometimes as a leader of, what are we going to address first, and how can we get a more efficient process without spending $5 million on a total renovation. So absolutely. Andy, we've had quite a lot of conversations about IFUs and some of the craziness that's asked of us. And so I'd love to hear your perspective about IFUs and the challenge that presents to being an efficient sterile processing operation.
Yeah, and I think Albert and Robert, really tie that in and said it best. Throwing mud at the wall to see what sticks is just not a good practice, right? You really want to dive into that root cause, and perception is everything. So a great example of this in a story that I like to share. When I was managing SPD, I had a physician call me up to the room, and I get in, and he said, they told me my tray would be ready in 2 hours. What happened? And I said, well, who is they? And he said, well, the staff in the room. And I said, well, sir, respectfully, the staff in the room don't work in sterile processing, and that's not how long it takes. And he said, okay, well, why don't you tell me how long it takes? I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take your tray, and I'm going to type out the IFU, which is the instructions manufactured for use, and I'm going to send it to you. And he said, yes, please do. And so I broke it down, start to finish. And I believe it came out to about 4.5 hours was the total time for this one tray. And I sent it to him. He turned around and put that in every OR and sent it to every nurse manager and said, if there's ever a question of how long it takes to do a tray, refer to that document right there. And that just set the tone for a better working relationship between the OR and SPD, because now they realize, okay, it's not just that quick, and they can start playing accordingly. And then they're working to help us get going a little bit faster, right? So now we're working together succinctly for better patient outcomes. And that's the best thing you can come out with, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine a better story, or a better ending to that story. But it really does, like, to have that level of understanding in the OR and to like win an influential surgeon over to your side of understanding like why it is that we can't drop off their vendor trays an hour and a half before the emergency surgery starts and expect them to be ready on time is that's powerful.
You create a big advocate, right? And so now they're pushing for, point of use cleaning, right? That's already improving your process, and it just leads to so many better things for everybody.
Yeah. I'm curious for our audience members out there who are, facing that challenge on a day-to-day basis, how broad that practice of going through the IFU and timing out the steps and really trying to take a look right down the horse's mouth of like, how long does it actually take us to process these trays? Because until you know how bad the problem is or like what you're trying to beat, you really can't be that creative about solutions. And so I think that's a great bit of advice when answering the question of like, why weren't my instruments ready? Being able to show the math behind it, really powerful, really powerful. So as we think about, so we've just talked about the problems that we have. How do we, take those particular problems and identify like what problem do I have in my department? How do you know where to start? Because typically, you start as a manager in a new sterile processing department. Maybe everything's a mess. Like, what do we focus on? Where do we get started? So, Andy, what would you say in terms of advice of like how you identify what's an opportunity for improvement where we can really get some gains here?
No, absolutely. So when you think about, what you're monitoring across the board, I mean, you have your overall process, you have, from the OR to decontam, but really you start in decontam as an SPD manager. That's what sets the tone for your department. So if you can start at decontam and identify bottlenecks there, wherever it's, your staffing model, if you have enough people in decontam, I see often where case carts are just piling up in decontam. You've got one person at the sink, no washers are going, and there's 5 people in assembly, waiting for that set to come through. So it's shifting your staffing. Okay, let's send 2 more people into decontam, 1 person to kind of start breaking down those case carts, 2 people to start pushing through the washer, and now you're actually moving, right? And that's setting the tone for the entire day. That downstream effect is tremendous.
Yeah, and often where you see that work piling up, you mentioned, at the sinks or at the washer, that is your thermometer that's telling you like, hey, there's a problem here. This is the one that needs to be addressed. And so if you don't know where to start, that's a great place, is just walk through the department on several different timestamps through the day and see where is my work piled up, and then do a deep dive in that area. It's a great way to identify where your true bottlenecks are. Got a message from Steve. Steve, are you on with us, or are you able to hear us?
Yes, Bobby. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Hey, we made it. So, Steve, thanks for persevering through that. And sorry again about the technical difficulties. I'm so glad that we get to hear from you on our panel today. Why don't you say hello, tell us a little bit about your background, and then I want to ask you about these opportunities for improvement.
Sure. So my apologies for being a little bit behind everyone. I'm the sterile processing manager at Sinai Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, part of LifeBridge Health. I've been in sterile processing now for, pushing 20 years. Prior to that, I was in the OR as a tech and a RN for about 15 years. So come with lots of peri-op experience.
Love that. You're able to maybe sympathize a little bit more with our OR team members who have the perennial challenges with sterile processing operations. So I think that's great. Steve, as we're talking about workflow optimization and kind of what do you do at the beginning of identifying where your opportunities for improvement are, we talked a little bit about finding those bottlenecks, but as a leader, what's your experience been with just speaking with staff and from the people who are working with the process on a daily basis, and how you can really leverage those relationships to learn more about your workflow.
Sure. So, like Andy alluded to, it's kind of like getting a walk around the department and understanding, what you have as a leader first and foremost, or what you don't have. But one task that I certainly made sure that I took care of when I first started here at the new facility, I came into an existing, host of, let's say, issues and staff. So I basically brought each individual team member into my office, just kind of like a one-on-one, and honestly just ask them to be honest with me what's working and what's not working for you, and we went from top to bottom, whether it was other personnel, whether it was department layout, specific equipment challenges, and so on and so forth. So I found those individual one-on-ones to be extremely helpful, and it really helped me put a really good picture together when I then physically walked through the department and saw things for myself.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. It can be tempting to step into those situations and think, I'm the one being brought in to fix this, and so really relying upon your own perspective and your own eyes. But it's so valuable to get that historical perspective of technicians who have been there for a while, know what's been tried, what's working, what's not working, and hear the issues firsthand from the people who are working with it every day. I know as a manager, whenever I would step into the workflow and work in decontam for a couple hours or work in prep and pack for a while, I would discover things about our workflow that just nobody had thought to tell me. They're like, oh yeah, that return window's been broken for like 3 weeks. We just live with it. It's like, why aren't we addressing this to be more efficient? So yeah, really getting that feedback is super important. Along those lines, as we're thinking about optimization projects, and we've identified what it is that our problem is, and we want to start creating some ideas about how to make things better. I want to ask the question, who ought to be involved in that? And this is kind of the stereotypical problem of inventing a solution without involving the right people. And I particularly want to hear Robert's perspective on this with that background in Lean Six Sigma, because that is baked into that system of figuring out, like, how do we go about developing optimization improvements and who needs to be involved in that. So Robert, just really broadly asking the question here, in optimization and sterile processing, who needs to be in the room as you figure out what do we do about our problems?
Yeah, so first off, absolutely the staff doing the work. But again, the value is determined by the customer. So we want the customers in the room too. We don't want to be solving problems in a vacuum, because we may not be providing what our customers really truly want. One of the things that I often do when I'm trying to put together a work group to make an improvement is to look to the complainers. Right? I hear, often that people are, worried, oh, we don't want that person in the work group because they complain. I'm like, no, get them in the work group. I want someone loud and vocal that's going to tell me everything that's wrong. Because those are all opportunities for us to get better. And one of the things that I find is really powerful about having the workers involved, the customers involved, and stakeholders too, leaders, right? People at the leadership level that can really remove barriers. Having the vocal people involved, once they help come up with the solution for the improvement, they're invested. Right. And then they're going to be noisy, sometimes equally, if not more so, about making sure you sustain and you do the things the way that we've now come up with. They can be your best advocate. I will always say, hey, you've got someone noisy you don't want in the room. No, I want them in the room, and let's get them involved.
That's really wise. And we're going to talk at length about sustaining improvements at the end. How do we keep the momentum going forward? But you're absolutely right. You can't expect people to sustain a process that they had no voice in creating. And so it's really valuable to have those frontline technicians. And I like the creative idea of involving your customers in there, that, you know, your customers define your quality. They define the requirements of when they need things and how they want them to arrive. And so having that voice in is really important.
Bobby, one other piece on that. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say one thing? And partner with your vendors, right? Whether that's your vendors that are bringing, you know, loaned instruments, or the vendors that are handling the equipment, you can get so much more out of your process improvement work groups by having those stakeholders involved too.
That's perfect. And I don't know, as I think about categories of people to be involved, particularly when it relates to equipment and construction, there are certainly other voices who need to be in the room. Albert, in your experience as a perioperative director and just your time in the OR and kind of being adjacent to sterile processing and now maybe more involved in sterile processing, any others that you think should be in the room, or just underlining that importance of including kind of all perioperative service in these optimization projects?
Yeah. So first off, I totally agree with Robert. Having the client as a stakeholder is important. I never do a business case on a project without their including their feedback, because any kind of project or business case, you're trying to resolve an issue, and it's their issue that you're trying to resolve. But I think the other key component to this are the leaders of the MDRD. So they have although the frontline workers have an integral part to play, you know, in specific aspects of a workflow, the manager or the director has a global view. They may, like myself, oversee several MDR departments, so they can see what works, what doesn't work in different areas, and try to find a solution that can be standardized across different sites.
That's really wise. And I guess when you say MDRD, that's medical device reprocessing departments, right?
Oh yeah, correct. Sorry,
okay. That's your Vancouver is showing. So
yeah.
No, that's good. No, that's really wise of making sure that leaders are included, and particularly when it's related to construction. There's going to be some other players that I'm sure you've worked with in relation to equipment manufacturers and project planners and facilities departments and things like that. Anything that you want to add in terms of construction related opportunity or optimizations?
Yeah, a big part of our team, whenever we do try to implement a new strategy, is vendor support. They play a key role. They know their equipment or their ability to create a better workflow. Why not leverage that resource? It's a huge resource. You may be a manager of one, MDR or several, but they have, several clients across a whole portfolio. Could be, several states or several provinces, and they, if you create that kind of partnership with your vendor industry, then that's a massive resource that you can really leverage.
Yeah, I would agree. We sometimes, our relationship with our vendor partners can be one only of salesman client, and trying to keep them at arm's distance because you've got your own ideas about things, but often if they're able to step into that consultation type role and really be able to take a look at your workflow and make some advice about changes that could help you, oftentimes they've got an even more global perspective than you as a leader do, because they're doing this all around their region, perhaps the country, and and have seen a lot of things that work and can be a very valuable resource as you're talking about it. And even to plug that one more time, a little bit smaller, I would really encourage our participants to go to local networking events. Maybe it's your local chapter meeting or something like that, and talk with other leaders and talk with other vendors, because the same challenges that you're facing in your department, I'm sure that other leaders are going to be facing as well. And being able to ask those vendor partners or other leaders in your region or city how they're solving those can give you some clever ideas about optimizing your own department. And so that could be really valuable. As we're talking about equipment and manufacturers and vendors, I think that's a natural segue to talk about what role equipment plays in optimization projects. We're going to get to the processes and how to, track data and KPIs in a bit, but just taking a look at equipment, what are some of the things that you guys have seen that equipment can make a big impact? And Andy, as our resident Getinge representative, I'll let you go first on this one. What role does equipment play in optimizing workflow?
Well, it plays a significant role, Bobby, and I'll give you a great example of something that I've seen out in the field. We were asked to come out to do an evaluation at a facility, and they couldn't figure out why they were bottlenecking so much in decontam. Aside from the layout where their cart washer was across the entire workflow, you had, I think it was 6 washers in place, but they only had 1 sink. And so not only were you bottlenecking case carts right in the middle of your workspace, but you're trying to feed 6 washers with 1 sink. And so the equation didn't add up. And so you naturally had that bottlenecking. So making sure you've right-sized your equipment, making sure you understand what your throughput and capacity is critical in starting that process.
Yeah, so not just looking at one piece of equipment, but kind of across all your pieces of equipment, almost like they're, different bars on a bar chart, and trying to make sure that they all rise to the same level, right?
Correct.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it's, workflow optimization, it's kind of a 3-legged race. You are only as good as your weakest link in that process. So you may, like to your point, you may get really great instrument washers that are going to push equipment through, or push instruments through. But if you don't also address those sinks, you're not going to move any faster than your process to get them through the manual cleaning step. So
exactly.
Yeah, taking a look at that balancing is really important. Looking specifically at the equipment, our washers, our sterilizers, I want to ask the question, like, what have you all found to be the best idea or best strategy for what kind of equipment? And I'm not asking about brands or products here, but sizes, pass-throughs, things like that. I know it's different in every environment, but are there any general strategies people should look at when they're thinking about designing equipment in their department? I guess anybody here.
Yeah, Bobby, if you don't mind. I want to just talk, for quite a bit, a lot of facilities were looking for big batch equipment. So equipment that could hold, 40, 50 trays at a time. And I'm not just talking about sterilizers, I'm talking about, washers and, other types of equipment too.
Yeah, this is America, give us the big equipment.
But if you think about it, if you have big equipment, you have big setup time, you have big wait time, right? You have to wait until you have a sterilizer cart that has 40 trays ready to go, and then you have an hour in the sterilizer that comes out the other side, and whoever is then tasked with building the case carts and putting away that equipment now has this unbalanced workload where they just got 40 trays all of a sudden, and they haven't had trays for maybe the last 45 minutes. So one of the things we find really helps unlock workflow and optimization and productivity is to go to smaller batches. I mean, we can't get to a single piece flow, maybe we will one day, but certainly having more smaller, washers or smaller sterilizers. We go to mediums. We're the main hospital today is a huge hospital, and we're doing 200 cases a day. We don't have any, giant floor loading sterilizers. We have medium-sized sterilizers, and quite a few of them, and we don't always fill them. As soon as we have a handful of trays ready to go, they're going in and they're coming out the other side, so that we can keep things moving and keep that flow moving. To the point that when I first came into the facility here, we took shelves out of some of our sterilizer racks, with the intent to get the staff to push the trays into the sterilizers without waiting. And it made a huge difference on overall turnaround time.
Wow. So that less is more, taking racks out of your equipment moved things through faster.
Bobby,
I've experienced, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, it's Albert. One thing I'd like to add, that one thing I look at when purchasing equipment is redundancy. It's so important. If I know I need 4 instrument washers, I'm going to see if I can ensure I either get a 5th washer in there, for when times when they're down for preventive maintenance or repair, or ensure that my cart washer has an instrument cycle, so that if my instrument washer were to go down, then it has capacity to continue the workflow. So built in some redundancies with all of your reprocessing equipment is really vital to ensure patients aren't adversely affected by repairs or mishaps.
Well, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that one's the hard one to pitch to administration in the project, like the one beyond our workflow requirement, but it is so important. Every sterile processing technician has been there on the day when the one cart washer goes out, and that is a miserable experience trying to keep workflow moving through decontamination. And so having that redundancy really important. And also touching on what Robert said about the size of batching. I've experienced that personally. One of the departments that I worked in had these huge instrument washers that were 2 racks wide. And you talk about the setup time, the load time, the time that washer is open, waiting to be filled and getting a full batch into it. And then this really long cycle. The experience that we felt out on the prep and pack side is people would have nothing to do until, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. And then those doors would open up and just this tidal wave of work would come out. And it wasn't an efficient use of resources. So yeah, thinking about how do we keep that one piece flow of moving small batches through the department, really important. And from a process perspective, I've seen that play out in technicians' minds as well. And I'm not trying to take over this question, and this has nothing to do with equipment, so I apologize. But the batching at the prep and pack station and moving that onto sterilization, people build this castle of rigid containers around them where you can't even see them over it. Yeah.
Get me started on that.
And then don't take it to the sterilizer. So go ahead and get started. Andy. Like, what is the problem with that, and like what thinking needs to shift in order to have a more efficient workflow?
It's prevalent everywhere, right? And just to touch on that quickly, what I used to tell people is a tray isn't done until it can go to the patient. So just because you've done 15 trays, half of those could have already been sterilized and been in the OR, right? So by holding those at your workstation, you're clogging up the process and you're keeping your whole process from being efficient, right? But kind of going back to the original question on the optimizing workflows, I think it's important to touch on automation. And as we progress, automation is certainly becoming more and more prevalent in our field. But I think Bill Gates said it best when he said automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiencies, whereas automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiencies. So as critical as automation is to keeping that flow going, you have to focus on your process. You have to have a good process around that, or else you're going to fail, right? It's just not going to give you the outcome that you're hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that, kind of using automation as a magnifying glass. Like if we rush to automate a bad process, it's just going to make things worse. But it can be really valuable in terms of saving steps. And I think that's where people are coming from with that, building the castle of rigid containers, that they think I'm saving human motion. I'm not taking as many steps. And so I'm getting more work done in the day. And if you only zoom in with kind of the microscopic lens of number of instruments that one technician touched for the day, they might be right. Like, they might get through more work by using that method. But when you zoom out and look at the department data and like what instruments arrive to the patient, I think the data will show that it's more efficient to have that one piece flow that keeps the equipment running and keeps things moving through the department. So that's a really great point. Steve, I want to touch on your experience with this as well, because I know that you've been in sterile processing for a long time. What role have you seen equipment play in optimizing workflows?
Sure, Bobby. So I think a couple things. One, it's great to have all the vendor partnership and, other elements come into play. But, we talked about process workflows, et cetera. But I think one basic thing that folks have to keep in mind when it comes down to selecting equipment is what items take, for example, washers. What items are you putting through your washers? It's nice to be able to fit 6, 7, or 8 smaller footprint washers in play, but if you're processing extra long instruments for robotics and so on and so forth, you have to make sure that your chamber is going to actually fit those instruments as well. That was a mistake at one of my prior facilities that was made, before me in the department. And, it's like, well, how do we process this stuff now? So just kind of keep that in mind as well. Secondarily, I just want to touch on the fact, back to the people, back to the users. You want equipment that's going to be efficient, but also ergonomic, which brings in the automation piece that Andy alluded to as well. So you definitely want to keep your people in mind. It's not just process, but it's also what can you add automation-wise, by some form of automated conveyor and automatic load, unload for sterilizers, et cetera, based on what's available and what your department can support, not only financially but structurally and space-wise. But you want to keep in mind what's important for your personnel, what's going to keep your personnel happy as well.
That sounds like experience and wisdom talking, Steve. And I like that. What you said with both of those points was essentially, let's start by looking at the end, like what are we actually trying to accomplish, and making sure that our solutions, both in our automation and our equipment selection, actually meet that need. And I think that's really wise, instead of, just going after particular features and then discovering, oh no, now we've got to manually wash all these instruments, or maybe we've got to get a carriage that only has one level in it so that we can have enough room to have the clearance to fit this big piece of equipment in, and there goes all of our efficiency gains. So that's really wise. I'm going to move the conversation forward to our particular metrics and KPIs, like how do we measure and improve the operations. And I would like to get hyper specific in this portion of the presentation. And I'm going to keep going with you, Steve, here. What are the things that you found related to data that have been useful in optimizing sterile processing operations, and something that you think would be helpful for our audience to take back to their departments?
Sure. Gosh, I could speak for hours on this, but I'll try to.
We've got like 3 minutes.
Here. So I will say data is extremely critical. You want to be able to measure a wide array of things, but one thing is, for example, I'll focus on decon process, okay? you want to make sure that whatever you are putting through your decon process, it truly is coming out clean. Okay, so you need to select some sort of, device. There's multitudes of things, whether it's protein test, resi test, ATP, whatever your, preference of choice is. You want to be able to make sure that you are actually verifying that your processes are truly working. And that's just an example for decon. That's pretty much at every stage of the game. The other thing that makes metrics important, again, comes down to the players, is who is your department leadership reporting these metrics to? That's also critical because that will drive what you really need to measure and report out as well. So if you're reporting through quality department, we really haven't mentioned much about infection prevention team, but absolutely crucial having them involved as well. What trends are they seeing on their ends, from an OR infection or other house-wide infection that we process for, in order to focus us in what we need to pay closer attention to. So whether it's immediate use data for sterilization, again, cleaning metrics, time and motion studies, there's numerous things that we can pick. But those are some of the critical aspects that I'll leave you with, and give in a few other folks an opportunity here.
I think those are both really wise points about the decontamination kind of specific example, and then also zooming out to department data and bringing in our quality, risk management, infection prevention team to talk about like what are the results and outcomes of our process. I think is really important. And what I like about what you said with the decontamination piece is that we need to have data to verify the outcome of our particular process. So if your goal is to have cleaner instruments coming out, how do we go about measuring that in a way that is useful? Because if we're not measuring it, we're not going to be actively trying to improve it, and finding ways to kind of fit that measuring into our workflow. So when we talk about data, people's eyes roll in the back of their heads when they don't have tracking systems, and they think like, maybe someday I'll be able to do data. But there's good ways to do even what Steve just talked about on paper. If you're doing prep and pack and you're getting somebody assembling those instruments that just came out of decontam, and they find an instrument that's dirty, it is not much of an ask to have them put a tick mark on a paper form that gets turned in to your manager at the end of the day. You're already doing a quality piece. Why not try to capture the data of that quality piece and measure it? So really wise solutions there, Steve. Thank you for adding those. Andy, I want to ask the same question to you, because I know that the Getinge hat isn't the only career hat you've worn. You've spent a lot of time in sterile processing departments even before that, and even now as kind of that consultant sales role. So can you tell me a little bit about the data pieces that you found to be really helpful?
Absolutely. And a little underutilized resource within the hospital is your performance services team, management engineering. If you have data, but you don't have the ability to truly trend it, or you just don't have that knowledge, they can come in and partner with you and say, give me your data points, and they can then trend it and go, this is what we're seeing. You're processing X amount of instruments per hour. And now you have a quantitative measurement, right? And then doing the time studies. So there's so many different points that you can measure. From the time it hits decontam to the time it hits the sterilizer, from the time it hits decontam to the time it hits the washer. I mean, there's so many data points that you can measure and have that continuous process improvement with the addition of that management engineering team or performance services. So don't think you have to do it alone. There are people in your facility that can help you.
That's really wise, because I'm no Excel wizard. And so like figuring out what to do with the data, often the problem is not a lack of data. We have an abundance of data. It's the lack of analytics. Like, how do I sort and analyze and make this data useful to me? And I think that's really really important. Albert, Robert, any that you want to add in there of data points that you want to highlight?
One I'd like to highlight, if you don't mind. It's a really simple one. It's work in progress. I think my team gets, they hear me, where's the whip? Where's the whip? Where's the whip? But what we know, and this, there's a law called Little's Law, which I suggest look it up, because there's really only two ways to increase, your productivity speed, which is throughput or reduction in work in progress. Because once your work in progress gets too high, your ability to recover, the time goes up exponentially. And so this is a big one and an easy one to monitor. 3 times a day, we send out a report that says how much work is not sterile, right? Is still sitting in our queue. And then we link that back to the case counts. We're not trying to get to 0 every day. We're trying to make sure everything that's needed for the next day is ready and the emergency items are ready, and balancing that in a way that we don't go over a threshold that we know puts us, far behind our ability to recover.
Yeah, and that stress factor. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. And the one KPI that I would want to add is, and we use our instrument tracking system for this, which is an incredibly useful tool, and that is monitoring which sets are turned over and used more than once per day. It really provides a lens into what we would call an appropriate amount of inventory. If we're turning a set over 3 times a day, then there's a really good indication that we probably need another one, because it's a recipe for disaster. And you can use that data to show, your finance director, here's proof. Returning the same set over and over and over again, and all you need is that one set to have an error or an issue, and that case is either postponed or delayed.
Yeah. Well, just to piggyback on that too is your returns from the OR, right? And I mean, let's be honest, every OR has 100% accurate pick sheets, right?
Yeah, right.
So using that return data to then help right size your pick sheets also helps not only SPD more efficient, because you're spending less time putting things back on the shelf, but then the OR is getting exactly what they need, and they're not having to send stuff back. So it hits everybody.
Yeah. So consider this segment a tease on data, to Steve's point, because it feels like a crime to keep moving, but we are already out of time. We're going to kind of glaze over this question. How has optimization helped SPD with staffing? It does, plain and simple, right? If you are not spending as much time with your instruments because you've optimized what's actually getting used in your trays, or to your point, Andy, if you're not pulling trays that are just traveling to the OR and then coming back sterile because they didn't need it, you are not going to have as much of a work in progress. What Rob talked about of having 350 trays down at 7 a.m. Because you'll be able to actually spend your staffing hours on working on those trays. And so it helps. Last section here, sustaining improvement. What advice do you all have for some dreamy sterile processing manager who has this brilliant idea of what's going to happen in the department and how we're going to improve? How do we keep that optimization process going and not fall back into chaos and wind up a year from now trying to fix the same problem that we tried to fix today?
2 words, Bobby: consistency and accountability. Too often we see processes put in place, it's communicated, nobody circles back to it. Nobody's held accountable to the new process. There's no measurement. It's, we're going to do this, and then you move on. And that's the easiest way to make things feel. So you constantly have to be monitored, constantly have to hold people accountable, and just really driving that consistency in process.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, Bobby, I would say if it starts to deviate from what you intended, ask why. Every once in a while, you'll find that a staff member is not doing it the way that we intended to do it because they have a better way to do it, or something that we put into place doesn't make sense. So I don't always take a really rigid approach to this on some things we do. But when I see something has changed, like if we just set up a new workstation and we set something up in a very specific way and it keeps moving to the other side of the room, well, let's go figure out why, because maybe we have it in the wrong place.
Hey, Bruce Lee said, be like water, right?
Yeah, I'd like to add maybe awareness, continuous awareness. Perhaps on a monthly basis, if you've improved error rates, then recognize staff or teams that meet goals, and it's something that is a continuous, constant reminder of what you're doing and how to continually optimize that workflow.
And to summarize those 3 points from our other 3 gentlemen, I would add, we all have busy lives and we have lots of office work as leaders, but you cannot lead from your office. You have to be in scrubs each day. You've got to be out there. You have to mingle with your staff, and you have to get constant feedback, and that's how you're going to sustain improvement. If your staff never see you, things are going to fall apart. I can promise you.
Yep. We've all seen it, and I appreciate that wisdom. Steve, I've given you the closing word there. Guys, thank you so much for this panel discussion. It seems like through the Q&A that came through, as well as all the emojis popping up, that has been very well received. I know that I've enjoyed it, and I also feel horrified that we can't spend another hour going through it because we left so much on the table. But thank you for that great discussion. If this has piqued your interest as much as it has piqued mine, I would invite you to connect with each of these panelists, either via email or LinkedIn. You'll find their contact information on screen in the bio section to follow up with questions or comments. All 4 of these guys are great guys that would love to have a conversation with you about what's going on in your department. And so I would encourage you to do that. Again, I want to say thanks to Getinge for sponsoring this education session, and to our panelists for taking the time out of their days to bring this education to you. If you are in this for the CE, just a reminder, hang with us. You'll be automatically directed to that CE certificate. And if you need the CBSPD credit, email us at info@beyondclean.net. And we will make sure to hook you up once we get that approval through the process. If you liked this session and you have a friend that you know would want to watch it, the good news is this webinar will now be available on demand. So save that registration link that you used and share that with whoever it is that you would like to share it with, because they will be able to come and watch this recording now that the session is over. So with that, we will wrap things up. We'll see you next time, and I encourage you to keep fighting dirty.